Today's set exercise showcases the same chart we had previously. They ask us to add a new data set corresponding to the profit as the difference between the two values of every month. I mean income minus the expenses equals our profit. That's obvious so far. We will change that in the spreadsheet, and we also have to add it to the graph. In other words, we have to modify the spreadsheet by adding the profit and removing the income. That way, we will be left with the expenses and profits only. Finally, the last point of the exercise is telling us to transform the chart into a stacked column chart type. That is, we must change it from clustered columns to stacked columns. These two types of charts are very similar. What happens is that we always have to keep in mind that the stacked chart must be used whenever we have two data sets, the sum of which is meaningful. This is because truly, if we are putting the first data set that is represented in a column on top of the other, which would be the second data set, the sum of them becomes the total height of the sum of the two columns. Logically, this will give us an idea of an evolution that needs to be meaningful, because stacking any data doesn't always make sense. But for today's case in which we are talking about expenses and profits, the sum of both is what previously we called income, which does make total sense for them to be stacked. So now is up to us to find a way to represent all this in our spreadsheet chart. Well, let's get started. So this is the chart that we have to work with. Here we also have these profits, which is the data that we have to add. Income, expenses, and profits. So this is just as easy as introducing here. Introducing here an expression that subtracts the expenses from the income. Now we can use the autofill down tool, so we apply it to the rest of the cells. This way we will get to see the profits. Alright, so the thing now is that, despite the fact that we have added a column full of data, the graph continues to look exactly the same. What do we have to do now then? We have to make it so that the chart represented includes other data sets, instead of the one we were using previously. There are two ways of doing this. Actually, the simplest one is, if we click on the chart, and then we click on the Design tab, we can change the dataset from this menu. Here we have the data that makes up the chart. So we see that we precisely have selected the dataset that contains both the income and expenses. And in fact, Excel is representing right here with a low opacity line the range that I selected when I first created the graph, which happens to remain the same despite seeing that now we have an additional column. And now that we have reached this point, I could start removing the income data and manually changing everything, but that option is a little too complicated.
So let's use a simpler way to achieve the same result.
Usually within the same chart, we can rename this in the following way. Instead of calling this range 1 to C13, we will go all the way to D13. A way to do this is by selecting the range directly in the chart. And we see that, from the moment I select the new range that includes the three data sets, from this specific moment, Excel is including the profits as an additional column. Therefore, we see here the three different data sets. The thing is that if we decide to accept now, that is yet to be the correct option. That's due to the fact that here we are representing in one chart the three data sets, and that is not what they have asked for. Instead, they've asked us to showcase the profits column together with expenses. In other words, they want for us to remove the income from this representation. Alright, so what we should have done was, when we were in this menu here, and we were seeing what data we had added, the range that this profit column has, when it says income, we should have removed this data set right here. And we notice that the moment we remove it, and we click on Accept, we finally get the right information represented in the graph. But still have to do one more thing in order to complete the exercise. As of right now, we have clustered columns, and they were asking us for stacked columns. So, what we have to do once again is, once we have selected this chart, what we have to go to this tab and change the chart type. Inside the chart type menu, we see that the first option is clustered columns. However, the second one is the stacked columns option that we were looking for. We select it, click on Accept, and automatically we have one column on top of the other, and there are no problems whatsoever. Alright, so this is effectively what they were asking for us to do in today's exercise. Now we should rename the chart accordingly. Let's type in the new name for the graph. And we do this by editing directly in the type box. Expenses and profits. It is also important to note that in the legend the right information appears because Excel has taken it from the headers of the titles. So that was today's exercise completed. Hopefully, you have found this lesson useful. See you all in the next one.